To begin our discussion of biomolecules, we first have to start talking about carbon. Carbon arguably is the most important element in living things. When you hear the word organic, think carbon-based. When we look at the carbon atom that is over here to the right, we know it is carbon because it has 6 protons. If we look at the periodic table, under number 6 we see a big C, which stands for carbon. Now, if you recall, the outermost electrons of an atom are called the valence electrons. Carbon has 4 valence electrons. Carbon is also a non-metal, which means it wants to get to 8 electrons. But right now, it only has 4. So to get to 8, we need to bond. And what carbon is going to do is it is going to make 4 bonds to get to 8. Because remember, 1 bond equals 2 electrons. Typically what happens is each atom will donate an electron to make the bond. So we'll see a bond with this electron with another atom. We'll see a bond here. We'll see a bond here. And we'll see a bond here. And that's how we get to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it can make up to 4 bonds to get to that 8 electrons. So versatility is the name of the game in terms of why carbon is so important. So kind of in summation, the 4 valence electrons, the ability to bond with up to 4 elements. These elements are typically going to be your hydrogens, your oxygens, your nitrogens, and even with another carbon atom. The fact that it could bind with itself is what leads it to making some pretty cool structures where we have single bonds, we have double bonds, we have triple bonds, we have chains, we have rings, a whole lot of possibility when it comes to life itself. The basis of all life, having those carbon anchors to make more complicated things possible. This is going to lead us to carbohydrate. First, let's kind of break that name down. Carbon. Hydrate, we're kind of looking at water here. So hydrogen and oxygen. And that is what makes up carbohydrate. We have a specific 1-to-1 ratio that makes up carbohydrates. Now, why are carbohydrates even important? First off, they are a fast and primary energy source. So it's going to be our primary energy source that we use, and it's also going to be very fast and quick. Also, we will see carbohydrates as structural support within the cells, which we'll get to here in a second. But one of the biggest things to understand is that 1-to-1 ratio. For example, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with glucose. Glucose is C6H12O6. Notice that 1-to-1 ratio. So that's a very easy way to pick out from the structure alone, the formula, if it is a carbohydrate or not. Now with biomolecules, we have what's called a monomer, which is the building block. The monomer of a carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. Mono means 1, saccharide means sugar. So 1 sugar, that's why we call it a simple sugar. We have 3 types of monosaccharides. We have what's called a glucose, we have fructose, and we have galactose. And when they bond with each other, we form more complex things. So examples. When we have 3 or more monomers, we call them a polysaccharide. Poly simply means many, Remember, saccharide means sugar, so basically just many sugars bonded together. A lot of times your sugars will have that nice hexagon shape. So think of it like that. This is a monosaccharide. When we have two of them bonded together, think about what a prefix for two could be. We would call this, bonded together, a disaccharide, which means two sugar. And that's when you hit words like sucrose, lactose, things that, words you might have heard before. But when we talk about polysaccharide, these are going to be the most complex ones. So we have four major ones that we're going to discuss. And those four are starch, glycogen, cellulose, and this is a hard one to pronounce. It's called chitin. Now, starch is a very important one. You hear this word with nutrition. There's a lot of starchy foods out there. It is basically storage for plants. As they photosynthesize, they store all of the glucose. They build it up into starch and just have it sit there until it is needed. Glycogen, this is what animals use. They store in their muscles and livers, which need a lot of energy. So they make sure they have energy storage within the animal cells. Cellulose, this is specifically going to be used for structure. This is our first kind of non-energy one. The cell walls in plant cells are made of cellulose. Now, as animals, we do not have the ability to digest cellulose. So this is one of the biggest reasons, and not to gross you out, but when you eat corn, whenever you then get rid of it and go to the bathroom, you still see corn. Because we don't have the ability to break cellulose down. So we still see that cellulose within the corn kernels appear when it's being excreted. And finally, chitin, structural support in insects and fungi. This is going to be in the exoskeletons. Kind of, once again, a structural component. So we have two that are involved with energy, and we have two that are involved in structure. Now let's do a quick review on dehydration, synthesis, and hydrolysis from class. Remember, synthesis means to build. Dehydration, just think what happens when you're dehydrated. You're probably very thirsty because you don't have water. So you're losing H2O to build something else. So in dehydration synthesis, we're becoming more complex. Lose water to become more complex. Hydrolysis is the exact opposite. Hydro means water. Lysis means breakdown. So we are adding water to break down. And this is one of the primary reasons why water is known as a universal solvent. Just think of what that means. It means we are going to dissolve. And when you dissolve, you are becoming simpler. Okay, so we look at the first one. We have two things becoming one thing, becoming more complex, and water is lost as a product. So what are we doing here? Two things, 1 plus 1 becomes one thing. So we have two things over here. 1 and 2 becomes 1. So what that is this is going to be dehydration synthesis because we are becoming more complex here. Two things become one. With letter B, we have one thing, and then we're adding water to it, and this becomes two things. So two things here. So we are becoming simpler because one One thing became two. This is going to be our example of hydrolysis. Same thing with the next one. Sucrose is table sugar. One thing. Add water. We break that down into two things. So we are simpler again. So we have hydrolysis. And then our final one, once again, two things becomes one thing, and then water is lost as a product. We are being more complex right here. So that is dehydration synthesis. So similar reactions, just opposite. Our universal solvent property tells us that water is good at dissolving. I think dissolve means kind of breaking things apart. When you break things apart, you're simplifying. You're going to have more products. When you're building things up, we are getting rid of that good dissolver. Okay, quick review in terms of what we covered with carbohydrates. What three elements are found in carbohydrates? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in a 1-to-1 ratio. Remember the word carbohydrate. Carbon, and then kind of hydrate for water, CHNO. Two examples of monosaccharides. We actually have three different ones, but two examples are glucose, and then we have galactose, and then we also have one called fructose. The name of the storage polysaccharide in plants. So what do plants use to store? You hear this a lot in nutrition. Starch. How is cellulose important to plants? Remember, we have two big functions. One is storage for energy. The other is structure. So it's going to be a structural component. And what's the most important structure in a plant cell? The cell wall. And then what are two main functions of carbohydrates? We have our primary energy. This is going to be quick and efficient. And then we're also going to have structural components. And remember, our two examples were cellulose, and then remember we also had chitin, which is involved in your fungi and your insects, specifically with your insects' exoskeleton. All right, final thing here. How do we know this is a carbohydrate? The key thing, count. So when we look here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 O's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 C's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and there's 2 H's right here, 11 and 12. 12 H's. So in regards to CH and O, 6 C's, 12 H's, 6 O's, we have that nice 1-to-1 relationship, which means carbohydrate. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask.